So I have a working theory on how I think they're going to do Doctor Doom in Avengers Doomsday, and it's a theory I don't think anybody's really brought up on the internet. I think that the Tony Stark we know in our main timeline is either going to be still alive and or will be brought back to life. Here's one of the things that I think is really interesting about this idea. This entire time for Avengers Doomsday, everyone is wondering how they're going to do Doctor Doom and how they're going to introduce a new character of Doctor Doom and variant of Tony Stark. But in truth, I don't think this movie is going to be about that. It's not going to be about introducing a new character. It's going to be about seeing how our current Tony Stark will transform into this new character. So his journey and his beliefs, his ideology, and how that transforms into Doctor Doom. Think about it. If you think about Avengers Infinity War, which introduced the character Thanos, Infinity War's movie, the main character is really Thanos, right? It's about his journey of collecting all the Infinity Stones and why he's doing that. And I think Avengers Doomsday is going to do the exact same thing. But the main character, of course, is going to be Doctor Doom, which is going to be our Tony Stark. It's going to be about how our Iron Man, Tony Stark, will become Doctor Doom, and that's what the Avengers Doomsday is going to be about. Now I know what you guys are thinking. This is kind of a crazy idea. It kind of devalues Tony Stark, the main timeline Tony Stark that gave up his life in Avengers Endgame and whatnot. But hear me out, and I kind of want to provide some evidence of why I think this is probably the most credible theory out there. The obvious theory would be that the Doctor Doom we're going to see is going to be Tony Stark from an alternate universe or an alternate reality. My problem with this is that it's too obvious. You know what I'm saying? Like, of course, we've seen variants of all these other heroes. We saw a variant of Chris Evans. That's fantastic for a Human Torch. And personally, what I think this is a lot of misdirections by the Russo brothers. First thing I want to talk about is how Marvel intentionally misdirects the audience. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a lot of actually the interviews that the Russo have been giving and a lot of the statements they've been making. This is me kind of being a little bit hypocritical of my previous statement, because I talked about how the Russos know that what they're doing is, things they say and things they leak out on purpose are precisely just to misdirect the audience. But hear me out, guys. I do believe that some things they say are true because they're still general. The Russos say things like, we need to rethink how Doctor Doom is, or things like Robert Downey Jr. is the only person who can play him. I mean, I don't think that's a lie. There's certain things they say that, it's hard to lie because it's so general and so broad, and kind of like, what reason would they have to lie about this? For example, when they say that Robert Downey Jr. is the only person that can play Doctor Doom, this specific quote actually gives me a lot of more confidence of why my theory is accurate. Think about it. Why is Robert Downey Jr. the only person that can play Doctor Doom? Because based on my theory, our Tony Stark is going to become Doctor Doom. So of course Robert Downey Jr. is the only person who can play it, because it's not going to be a variant version of it. It's not going to be this brand new Doctor Doom or whatever. It's going to be our existing Iron Man, his transformation into Doctor Doom. And lastly, here's one very important thing I keep hearing in a lot of these interviews. They were initially going to do, of course, Kang Dynasty and the Secret Wars, but now they switched to Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. A lot of interviews you hear the story of how the Russo brothers got back on the project. One interesting thing I keep hearing is that the Russo brothers, it was actually quite a bit of time until they actually decided to accept the idea of directing this movie, until they had one single activating idea. And I think this theory I have is the activating idea. And think about it, like, it's quite an activating idea, right? This whole time where they're trying to figure out, man, how are we going to do Doctor Doom? How are we going to introduce this new character that we don't even have built up in our MCU yet? The only way you can really do it is if you kind of have an existing character transform into that character. And I think this is kind of the only way you can do it if you rush it. In this case, they are. Think about this activating idea. Avengers Doomsday is not going to be introducing a new character, but going to take an existing character that's beloved, Iron Man Robert Downey Jr., and his transformation on how he becomes Doctor Doom. Another interesting thing that actually just happened recently was it's been confirmed that Robert Downey Jr.'s contract has been extended as Doctor Doom after Secret Wars. So I mean, come on guys, like, with this theory, this kind of makes sense. Like, instead of unfortunately doing Doctor Doom that has his origin story in Latveria and whatnot, I think they're going to continue using Robert Downey Jr., our current Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark, will be Doctor Doom. He will be a character that continues past Secret Wars, and this contract extension seems kind of gives a lot more credence to this idea. You know, when I was doing a lot of my research on Doctor Doom, because I'm not familiar with the comics, and I started watching a lot of comics explainer videos on YouTube, I realized I was thinking, I was like, as a person who only watches the MCU, and I was like, honestly, this Doctor Doom character, the way he's explained in the comics, he sounds a lot like Tony Stark. Honestly, like think about it. I think one of my favorite movies of MCU all time besides has been Avengers: Civil War, and I gotta ask you guys, who is the bad guy in that movie? You're most likely gonna say Zemo, of course. Yeah, what he did, but at the end of the day, when Captain America and Iron Man fight, you understand Iron Man. You understand why he's doing what he's doing. It's not right per se, but come on, bro. I think this is what you call the most reasonable crash out ever. He just found out that his teammate, Captain America, who's supposed to be the symbol of integrity, the symbol of all good, has kind of kept this big secret that his best friend essentially killed his parents. And even Captain America lied to him. Of course, Bucky got brainwashed into doing that, blah blah. So it's technically not his fault, but he did do the deed. And actually, even at the end of the story, Captain America concedes. In the letter, he's like, "I apologize. I should have told you," etc.
I know I hurt you, Tony.
And this is one thing when I was doing a lot of research on Doctor Doom, I was like, "Oh, this is the perfect way to do Doctor Doom in Avengers: Doomsday." The villain is never the villain in their own story, right? They're always the hero. And in that story, I mean, everybody who watched the movie, did you look at Iron Man as being like a terrible person or anything? You're like, I bet most of you guys like, dang, I kind of get it. He just killed my mom. You know, I just found out he killed my mom, and one of my close friends, Captain America, kept a secret from me my whole life. I feel completely betrayed. So very reasonable crash out. And I think if they capture that essence of how they did Iron Man in Civil War, I think they'll do Doctor Doom very, very well in Avengers Doomsday. Because I think that's how they're gonna do it. I think they're going to make it where you kind of know he's the villain, but when you hear him in Avengers Doomsday, you're kind of like, he's not as bad as I thought. And Doctor Doom in the comics, from my understanding, is quite like, he does have actually pretty soft and good moments, right? Like he saves Valeria, and which is Mr. Fantastic's daughter, and he actually respects her and cares for her a ton. So there are a lot of parallels from my understanding of seeing how Iron Man is done in the MCU and how Doctor Doom is in the comics. Of course, I'm not a comic reader. Maybe you can correct me in the comments. Fine, but it seems like there's a lot of parallels between these two characters and the way they do them. So I think they can kind of merge them into one for the MCU. This actually leads me into my next fact. So I was doing a little bit of research on who Tony Stark is. So guys, I have a little confession. I'm not as knowledgeable about the comics as I am the MCU. I've started loving the Marvel because of the MCU, and now I've kind of been watching a lot of comics explained to see kind of what happens in the comics, how they do it and whatnot. So I got a confession. I'm not the biggest comic reader. I don't think I ever will be, but I love the MCU, so I'm going to talk about it. But I was doing a little bit of research into the comics, and from my understanding, one of the things I researched and found was that who invented time travel in the comics? And they give you two answers, kind of. They say one is King the Conqueror, obviously the guy who's in and out of time. The person who is the first person to time travel in the comics is actually Doctor Doom. And that's a very interesting parallel to the MCU, right? In Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark kind of invents time travel. I think this could also have been kind of that activating idea of how the comics compare to how we do it in the MCU. Of course, in this case, in the MCU, the person who quote unquote invented time travel as of what we know today is Tony Stark, Iron Man. And in the comics, it's the first time someone's time travel is Doctor Doom in the comics. So wouldn't it kind of make sense to kind of glue these two ideas together in the MCU? Now, of course, I've been thinking about this idea for a minute. Is this really a good idea? After a bit of thinking and processing, yes and no. After the announcement of Doctor Doom being played by Robert Downey Jr. and them doing Avengers Doomsday instead of Avengers King Dynasty, I started doing all my research on Doctor Doom via the comics. I started watching a bunch of comics explained and a lot of other content creators on YouTube, seeing how they actually do Doctor Doom in the comics. And I gotta be quite honest with you, Doctor Doom is freaking awesome in the comics. Like, he sounds like such an awesome character, and I would love to see that portrayal of him being done in the MCU. So that's the side of me that's kind of like, I don't think this will be the most faithful adaptation, But that's why I'm a little upset, because the way they do in the comics is so freaking epic and he's such a great character. But on the flip side of why I'm actually kind of interested of them doing it this way is a couple of reasons. So we all know the current culture with Marvel movies and them not doing as well as when Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. They've been having a lot of flops in these recent phases that, I mean, they've been losing a ton of money and it hasn't been that exciting. Like, I don't feel as excited to watch these movies. But I was thinking, I was like, okay, fine. If we just accept the fact that, okay, fine, Robert Downey Jr. will be playing Doctor Doom. Let's accept that, okay. And Avengers Doomsday is coming out next year. It feels a little rushed. Okay, let's just accept that. Is this the best way to do Doctor Doom? And honestly, I think it is. Because the alternative would be to, let's just have a variant of Iron Man, and then we'll just make that person be Doctor Doom, and you develop his story. He's the same face as our current universe's Tony Stark, and then you just make him be different because he's a variant. I honestly think that's such a cheap idea, personally, and I actually don't like it. I actually like the idea more that our Iron Man Tony Stark will become Doctor Doom. And I think that's much more interesting because you have to think about it on this timeline. They need to, like, Avengers Doomsday is coming out next year. I mean, they have zero buildup, guys. It's coming out in about a year. Zero buildup. Imagine all the work they would have to do, years and years of content to build up a brand new character, different actor, or whatnot. Versus now, if they're on this accelerated timeline, what is the best way to go about this? And I think the best way would be, from a marketing perspective, Robert Downey Jr. I mean, he's an actor. He gets a lot of attention. I mean, from my understanding, his announcement on Instagram when he became Doctor Doom was one of the most viewed IG reel in the first 24 hours ever. So from a marketing and business perspective, those are great numbers. And secondly, like, you have to give it to Robert Downey Jr. You got to give him his flowers. He is a phenomenal actor. I mean, look at him in Oppenheimer. He did a phenomenal job. And say what you will, I think if we accept the fact that we are in an accelerated timeline of producing this Avengers Doomsday movie and having to introduce a brand new character, what is the best way to do that? And I think it would be Robert Downey Jr., our Iron Man, becoming Doctor Doom. Now, here's kind of the fun part of how theorizing. If my theory is true, then one of two things need to happen. Either he's actually not dead and he actually survived Endgame, or he gets resurrected. Now, this is some fun. We can kind of theorize how they're going to do this. And I was thinking about this. I was like, how could they do this? So in Avengers Endgame, they kind of show the damage that the Infinity Gauntlet does to the wearer. You need to be a strong being. Of course, Thanos, he's one of the most strongest beings in the universe, so he can wield all 6 of the Infinity Stones and even snap, and it destroys a lot of his body, but he's still alive, and he actually uses it again to destroy all the stones, and he nearly dies from it. So they kind of establish in the film that these Infinity Stones, when all of them are used to do something like snap and wipe out half the universe, takes a toll on the person wielding the power. And this is shown again with the Incredible Hulk. He doesn't die, of course, but he gets like permanently damaged essentially. But I was thinking about this. I was like, what if our Tony Stark is still alive? Think about it. Once Tony Stark invented time travel, you really think he hasn't been, thinking about all these parallel alternate universes that exist? I think he's a very smart scientist and inventor. Pretty sure he kind of already grasped that idea. And secondly, like I said, he's an engineer. He understands how these Infinity Stones work. Him, Rocket Raccoon, and the Incredible Hulk, 3 smartest characters in the MCU, were the ones who designed the gauntlet such that you could wield the power of the Infinity Stones. And remember, you have to think about it. Thanos had to use the Star Forge to create the gauntlet to harness that power. And Tony Stark was able to do it in his freaking shop. So whether that's a good how they did that, if you guys agree with how that they did that, I mean, I guess you can kind of say that Tony Stark is a phenomenal inventor because he could harness the power of a star in his home. And I mean, well, that's how the arc reactor works, right? It's basically a star. It basically harnesses the power of a star. Maybe Tony Stark somehow, you have to think about it, in those last 30 seconds in which Tony Stark had all the Infinity Stones in his arm when he says his last thing to Thanos, he was the strongest being in the entire universe for about those 30 seconds. And I was trying to theorize, I was like, man, what if like they do something in which in that moment he learns everything, or he's been thinking about this moment of what he would do if he were to grab the gauntlet, and maybe he did something with like the reality stone or the time stone, which he kind of faked his death with the reality stone showing a fake visual, And I know you guys are thinking, hey, the snap, I mean, it basically almost killed Thanos. Like, there's no way a human being could take the power of all this Infinity Stones. But you never know. What if, like, he did something such that he designed the gauntlet in a way to interact with his suit that kind of minimized that damage? Also, think about this. He didn't use those 5 stones to kill half the universe. He used it just to wipe out Thanos' army. So maybe he didn't use it to the full power that Thanos did when he wiped out half of the universe, so he didn't take as much damage. Another idea is, instead of him or still being alive, would be, what if he was resurrected? Maybe I was thinking that maybe they do something with like the Watcher. They introduce the Watcher, and Watcher like has to resurrect him for whatever reason. Then Tony Stark is like, he's like, oh man, I can go back to my family. I can see all my Avengers buddies. But then he starts learning about the incursions. He starts hearing about the events that happened in other movies while he's been dead, and then he wants to go see Morgan Stark, but he realized it'd be worse for him to reveal that he's still alive. Thinks that working in the shadows might be the best way to save their world, right? Maybe he works in the shadows for a minute just to deal with all these other incursions and whatnot, and maybe he's trying to figure out what to do, and maybe that's the reason why it hasn't been revealed that he's still alive, because he doesn't even want to. He's purposely hiding in the shadows, and he starts learning, let's say, the mystical arts, because he's like, wow, like he probably just started learning about the mystical arts when he was introduced to Doctor Strange, right? He's a man of science. He doesn't really do this stuff, but maybe he started learning the mystical arts in this period of time because he realized this is the only way I can become strong enough to protect my universe. And that's kind of Doctor Doom's character. But yeah, guys, that's my theory. I've been thinking about this for a minute now. I haven't seen anybody on the internet bring up some kind of theory like that. I've heard many other theories. This is the theory that kind of came up on my own. Maybe you guys have seen it other places on the internet. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I haven't seen it. But yeah, I would really love to hear you guys' comments and what do you guys think of this theory? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What don't you like about it? What don't you hate about it? Etc. And give me your opinions. I really want this to be a discussion. I love the MCU. I grew up with it, but obviously nowadays it hasn't been the best. But I really want to see. I have a soft spot for the MCU because of all the great memories I had as a child with these movies. So yeah, guys, please comment down below what do you guys think, and please subscribe to me. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers. I'm very new to this YouTube game. So yeah, guys, this is just a theory and just an opinion. So hope you guys had a nice day.